one of the things that we know happens when disaster hits is we lose power. And that means that cell phone that you have is going to be useless to you. Even if you're connected to hundreds of thousands of people around the world, what's best for you is to have people in your community. And when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about both environmental resilience, that is creating the capacity for our communities to withstand the kinds of climate shocks that are coming, especially as we have to not just recover from extreme events or disaster, but also rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of two-stage process when you're dealing with disasters. The first is response, like you respond to try to make sure everything gets addressed. And that's where we see like what we call the mucking and gutting period, which is where you have to clean out, like burn out houses from wildfire or places that got like mud and dirt and water through them, right? From a flood or an extreme, storm or something. Or, just getting rid of debris if it's an extreme storm. And then there's recovery. And recovery is where you actually rebuild. And what needs to happen is we need to rebuild thinking about how to be resilient about these shocks that we know will come. The other side of it is to create social resilience. And that's something that we don't talk about enough when we think about climate change or environmental issues. And that is the fact that we know that communities can handle shocks better when they're more connected, when people are embedded in their communities. And this is something that I think that everybody who cares about climate change should think more about, because a lot of people who think about climate change spend a lot of time on their phones and connecting virtually with the communities that they care about. And we know that it's a lot harder to have the kind of reciprocity you need in a place where you're going to experience the climate shock when you're spending all your time online. When an extreme event happens, it's your friends and neighbors who are going to be there to support you when you need to find food, you need clean water, you need to find, clothing or support for your children if your school's destroyed. And these things are going to happen. They're going to get flooded, they're going to get burned, they're going to be, there's going to be all this need for our societies to be more resilient. And so that's the other side of this. And I talked a little bit about these Service Corps programs that are starting to do this in a lot of communities in the United States. I know programs like this are starting to spring up in other parts of the world. And I think that we should be absolutely supporting them. You don't need to be an activist to do this kind of work. You just need to be a member of your community and a member of your society. And I think that is one of the best things that we can all do to save ourselves.
How do you do that? Like, what are some of the ways that you can sort of mindfully and respectfully get involved where you feel comfortable?
One of the things that I really push for is for people to start to identify struggles that you can get involved in your own community, where you live, where you work, where you maybe have a family or you have some family, because you have more connections there, which is not to say you couldn't go somewhere else and build those ties. But I think that it's the social ties that are so valuable for thinking through how we make that kind of change. And so when you ask me that, I mean, one of the things that I've been dealing with my students, so I'm teaching a class in activism in the environment right now, is that my students started out the semester downtrodden because of the experiences they had. Many of them had been involved in this struggle to try to stop the Willow Project, which is this big fossil fuel expansion project in Alaska, which was the activism was almost entirely online. So many of them were very active in the TikTok campaign, right, which was all about using TikTok and then signing these online petitions. And they came in saying that they were just so frustrated that it didn't work. And so one of the things that I've said to my students is, think about how you can actually, connect more than just, by doing this, right? Because that's me scrolling, right? So the things that I would say is that you should look for places in your community to get involved. In the United States, we have elections happening across the country at the local level all the way up to the national level that will happen in November. We're in primary season right now in a number of places. And there are these wonderful opportunities to actually get involved. You could get involved in the presidential campaign. You don't have to get involved in the presidential campaign. But more important, in my opinion, is getting involved in whatever's happening in your local politics. There are referenda happening across the country. Many of them have to do with clean energy transitions, support, just transition, support for communities of color, frontline communities, and all of those things can be so valuable. Or if you don't want to do anything that's politics and you don't want to be involved in the electoral system, there are also great ways to support your schools and support, food banks or some of the things that I think are really interesting now is community gardens that will create food and support communities where there are less resources, and will be available to support and provide food if there's disaster. So there are all these different ways you can get involved, and it's just limitless. It's really about us trying to think more about how we can connect in our lives rather than being like it's just about this little way we think about activism, because it's all about our lives. That's the way I would think about it.
We creators, filmmakers, documentarists, journalists, we are playing with this skill of storytelling. So what can we bring to the table?
Well, I think that helping to shine light on the ways that misinformation is spreading around climate, and the ways that people that certain interests are taking advantage of people and trying to dupe them into not thinking that climate change is real, not thinking that climate change is a problem, not thinking that climate change could have really dire consequences and effects on all of us within the next 10 years. I think that shining a light on that is absolutely valuable. I think that telling the stories of people who are creating the resilience that we need, and the organizations that are trying to build community and solidarity, I think those are so valuable, as well as when there are moral shocks, helping to draw attention to them. So, I think it's great that the media, for example, talks a lot about the activists, the shockers, and their actions. But I think we need to go deeper than that, right? I know that the reason that the folks are doing this kind of shock is because they're getting the attention for doing this shock. But we should also be talking about the folks who are building campaigns and carrying them through and creating small changes that will last and, have real effects in our communities. So I just hope we can do that as well.